Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of the Royal Blue podcast. And it's been a busy couple of days. There's plenty going on and off the field at the moment. Unfortunately, I have to report the latest injury situation here at the Echo. My colleague Joe Thomas there, playing football with us in the Echo game on Thursday evening. There's a suspected fractured ankle. I mean, how's it holding up, Joe?
Yeah, nothing suspected about it. The X-ray came back, and I've got the boot and crutches, Chris. It's confirmed it is. So I think certainly me summer break's been ruined. Me pre-season's on hold, and it's questionable as to whether I'll be fit for the new season.
Wow, glad to hear. But coming straight up to date. I mean, we're recording now just after 1 p.m. on Monday. On the one hand, still no news. Everton are off the pitch, but Bournemouth have been busy, and the shock sacking of Gary O'Neill, who obviously ended up having his last game at Goodison Park. I mean, it take you by surprise, Gav?
I think it's taken everybody by surprise. I mean, he was one of the candidates for manager of the year when you see where Bournemouth were when he took over. And you know, I know they lost the last 3 or 4 games, but they were safe, weren't they, with a month to go in the season virtually. And on that basis, you'd think he deserves another shot at least, and makes you wonder who they're going to be bringing in. Yeah, but that was a major shock. You do wonder who runs. I know we're ironically said on the Everton podcast, but you do wonder who runs football clubs, the quality of the people involved sometimes. But yeah. That seems ridiculous, and most of the feedback I've seen just briefly before coming on air, as it were, was the same.
Yeah, Joe, Bournemouth obviously ended up playing a huge part in the Everton story last season, and we went to those 3 games against Gary O'Neill. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, could this potentially be a good thing for Everton?
I mean, it's absolutely astonishing, and you know what? I hadn't quite got round to the process of assessing whether it was good for Everton or not. Obviously, Everton have got to get their own house in order, but I don't think it's a bad thing, really. Obviously, there's a degree of intent when you look at what the owners are saying at Bournemouth around transfers and things like that. They must have a plan for, to spend money and maybe change the style of play for what's coming, and ambitions. But I think we've seen on so many occasions, particularly with clubs that have quite recently got to the Premier League or don't have a consistency in there, the ambition can just as easily take you backwards as it can take you forwards. Everton have shown that, obviously, with Fahad Bashiri, and it really feels like Bournemouth have got themselves into a situation where they had a far better season than anybody could have possibly imagined, including their own manager at the start of the season, Scott Parker, when he came out and was criticising the strength of the squad that he had taken up and the fact that he believed it had no chance of staying in the Premier League. Gary O'Neill did a wonderful job to keep them up, kept them up. And they played competitive football. They went to a couple of their games. Obviously, they went to Arsenal and went 2-0 up and lost to a stoppage time goal from Reece Nelson just after Everton had gone there and fought. I remember going there on the midweek night and thinking Everton had done all right for shutting up shop for 40 minutes and just keeping it tight. And obviously, then they got blown apart. But then you looked at what Bournemouth had gone and done. And you thought, well, actually, maybe there was an opportunity to miss if Everton had been a little bit more aggressive. So, it's interesting. You think just as another club gets a point of stability, they go and put it all at risk, and that's a dangerous thing to do in this league. And as a result, you probably have got an argument to say that a club that would probably count itself as being a few steps ahead of Everton going into this summer now perhaps finds itself dealing with a bit of instability, which again is a mess that it's created for itself.
Yeah, just finally on this, Gav. I mean, what it shows. I mean, there are US owners at Bournemouth and Everton currently, as we know, in the process of potentially having the US investment in. I suppose an American owner might not hold much stock with Gary O'Neill, and we have to wait and see who he ends up bringing in. We're told the statement actually said that there was going to be an appointment made imminently, so it looks like they've got somebody lined up. But it looks like a more high-profile candidate will be coming in, and these US owners, they are known for making decisions like this.
Yeah, Todd Bowley you're talking about, and people like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering whether they said they were making an appointment in the next 48 hours there, Chris, but I think that's
Well,
part that, yeah. I mean, it's just modern football for you, and I think there's a wider issue, isn't it, over ownership of football clubs and I mean, and US owners and Middle Eastern owners and the pulling in different directions. And I think it's all. I mean, that we'd have a long conversation about the Premier League and its competitiveness and the people who run football clubs. Whose interest they've got, and this is just another example of it. People, I mean, reading between the lines, do you just think Gary O'Neill's not sexy enough for the club?
It would seem so, wouldn't it?
That's everything that smacks out of him, mate. Setting aside, he kept them up reasonably comfortably in the end. And it's fact that they just want a bigger name, don't they? Not somebody who was still until recently like a former player, wasn't he? Really?
He's only a young man,
and maybe they're just looking for somebody who's a bigger name and who can raise the profile of the club, and that would appear to trump achievements at this stage, but doesn't it really? And I think that's really sad.
As Gab has just mentioned there, he's the old 48 hours. We discussed that on our last podcast. It was the three of us again last Thursday. It had already been and gone by then. We're now, another 3 days on. We're just 4 hours short of it coming up to a week now since the initial announcement at 5 p.m. on the Monday. Your Royal Blue column over the weekend was about how the headline Everton shot themselves in the foot, and we're still waiting.
Yeah, we are. It's I just don't quite understand it, to be perfectly honest. I just think if everyone want to if you want to be taken seriously, you got to act seriously. I mean, I tried to be as fair and balanced as I could in that call in that piece. I think ultimately we know that these things are really tricky. We know they're complex. There'll be legal matters. There'll be all sorts. But at the end of the day, they should know that as well. They'll be going through that process. So don't self-impose a deadline that doesn't need to be set in the first place. It's just absolutely bizarre. You would like to think that they would already know whether or not they could do that, deliver an update within 48 hours before that they pen that and get it signed off and then do it, almost to be right in the next one as to sending that one out to everybody else. But instead they're not, and it's just really frustrating, really. I mean, it's just more negativity and it's more, it's just causing more frustration for a fan base that's already frustrated and it just seems so daft. And I kind of look back in the last 6 months and I kind of keep finding myself in a position where I'm doing these articles where applying scrutiny or questioning or criticism, and don't want to be doing this all the time. And I think there's a perception from some people in and around the club that kind of I do these because they're fashionable or I'm trying to appeal to the radical section of whatever the Everton fan base according to the club. But like, I'm doing these because I've always got no choice, because they're put us in a situation where if I'm going to act right with any integrity or any honesty, like how can you not be questioning what's going on? It's absolutely ridiculous. And as we keep saying, it's all completely self-imposed, self-inflicted. And like I finished that piece saying, Everton really need to start taking a step forwards, but first thing they've got to do in order to make that movement is stop shooting themselves in the foot. This game is hard enough when you've got everything going for you. I mean, when you're hampering yourself in the way that Everton are at the minute, it only makes things even more difficult at a time when Everton need to be getting everything right just to have a chance of making themselves competitive next season.
And Gav, that situation actually has moved on in terms of Neville Southall, a player who's very dear to both you and I, mentioning. I mean, I suspect with his hard-hitting views, he's not always the most welcome person in the good sports corridors of power. But he was asked on the situation of the weekend because he'd done an initial tweet where he was talking about the fact that Graham Sharp and he would always remain friends, and just a difficult situation. He wasn't sure how he'd have reacted himself, alluding to the fact that Sharp was the director and was one of the three who went last Monday. But then he was asked in a follow-up question his thoughts on Bill Kenwright, and he gave a very blunt answer, time's up.
Yeah, and I think he would not surprised to hear Neville's views on that. I think Gray may have like some of Neville's support while Graham was a non-executive director, by the way. To be honest with you, not after the fact, because that's all say that county. But I think, yeah, it's his statements. I've read it a few times, and Joe, I think I read your piece about it on Saturday, that there's still a couple of things there that I'm still it's unanswered. Where they say like the directors have been working towards a smooth transition. Well, that implies that the directors have been told at some point that they will be leaving, doesn't it? So when was that decision made? Was it 3 months ago? Was it 4 months ago?
Yeah, well, I think I offer a little bit of insight in this because I was looking quite recently at some of the documents on Companies House around the loans and the charges that have been made to kind of, I think, help the next stadium funding. I think on one of the documents there is signed by Denise Barrett-Baxendale on the 19th of May. I think off the top of my head, I'll check that while we're on here. But that just made me. I remember seeing that and thinking, oh, well, because like probably a lot of us have heard all sorts of rumors over the past few months, and some people, I think it was probably 8 weeks ago. I think a fan stopped me at halftime in the press box and said, "Has she gone?" Because I've heard she has, and I was like, "Well, I don't think so." And it looks like she probably did remain in post, certainly signing documents, and that's certainly till the very close to the end of the season at least.
But at some point it said transition. Now transition say some time corporately. So maybe it's all 2 months ago or 3 months ago. You're still here, but you'll be leaving at the end of the season. And I think you said in your piece that actually, that there's been no leaks about anything about all of this beforehand, which is interesting. And another thing as well, so that's the unanswered question to me. Maybe the club, just trying to think aloud here and just speculate, maybe the club didn't want to say in February, March, the directors will be leaving at the end of the season, because that's when the protests were, obviously quite high profile, because that may look as though they're just reacting to what the supporters are saying, then, doesn't it? They're just basically caving into to a degree. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they've left it till now, but decided several months ago that the people will be going. And the other thing as well is, and it's just a daft question, who do you think said you'll be hearing in the next 48 hours? Whose decision was that?
Yeah, I couldn't even begin to guess.
Is that Mashiri? Is that Kenwright? Is it maybe some of the potential new board members? Or is it just something that's come from the communication team? It just throws up like that there's a little bit of and this is the really damaging point, isn't it? Really, that I think you said on Saturday, it throws up that there's a bit of a power vacuum there, isn't it? There's a bit of a decision-making vacuum. And I was just thinking, because I think that the notice on side is who decided on this 48 hours. There could be one of 3 or 4 parties in that, and from a corporate perspective, that gives me some more ease, and it's still, as we said last week, he could have done it. He could have worded it differently and just removed the problem, really, couldn't you?
Yeah, I think that's the big frustration, isn't it, Gav? That, as Joe's mentioned himself, there's nobody made them use this phrase, and it's concerning that they felt that they were in a position to meet it. Obviously, you wouldn't say that if you didn't think you were going to meet it, and then they've been unable to do so.
Yeah, well, as I say, because you've been working, like on Friday's pod, you're saying you've been working in transition. You've known that this transition is going to take place, and there will be a changeover at some point. So you would have think about once we've decided, once your work is complete and telling the new people what they need to do and stuff like this, then we'll announce those names as well. And there's a few there's still a few questions for me about what it means for the club in terms of who's doing what at the moment, who's doing what in the future.
Yeah, we'll wait and see on that one. Joe, the profit and sustainability charge at Everton face with the independent commission. It's been reports now that date has been set for the 25th of October, but I think anyone who thinks that Everton will be in and out there at the afternoon and there'll be a verdict either way, that's not going to be happening, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, first and foremost, we don't really know huge amount about how these things work, because we haven't had one yet. Obviously, the Man City charges come before Everton, but that's a process that is still very much ongoing. But anything like this is always going to take a lot of time. Obviously, October takes us well into next season already, and you go from there, and there'll be everyone's going to make their arguments. I wouldn't be surprised if obviously they'll come away. Whoever leads it will make a judgment, and then whoever loses it will probably appeal it, and it'll just get kicked down the road. Nothing like this ever takes nothing like this ever happens quickly. I think we're a long way from finding out the conclusion of that.
And in regards to that, and like we said, as Joe said, the details are still very sketchy. But what we've seen is articles from other publications side seemingly trying to join the dots in this respect, and it seems a very dangerous game to play, because from what we understand, this isn't necessarily referring to on the field matters, and obviously, like I say, details are sketchy and nothing's been outlined at the moment. But there seems to be a degree of opportunism, really, again, and that's alluding to that potential power vacuum at Everton that you've spoken about.
Yeah, and I don't think it helps us that the people who were there during that time period in question won't be around for the hearings. I'll take Joe's point was well made on Friday, but also shows the clubs. You said we're doing something about it, and in terms of rectifying matters, and I get that. But to me, I think I said this at the time. I think that it's a bit shambolic in the way things are run by the Premier League, that there's a hearing take place more than 18 months after that period ended.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this, I should say, that won't be the end of the matter. So this charges up until the end of March 2022, isn't it, I think? So that the hearing on that is October 2023. Well, that doesn't do anybody favours, does it? It doesn't do Everton any favours for a start, because how can we plan? We may be planning in the summer that if things go wrong, that we'll do it. We'll make some purchases in January, but then get found actually in October. You can't. So then, if we'd have known that, there's a January transfer ban, we may approach the summer completely different. And I'm not defending Everton here, but it's just the whole thing is just unsatisfactory that it takes that long to come to a judgment. It does nobody any favours. It doesn't do any other Premier League club any favours. It doesn't do those clubs who went down last season, who will quite legitimately say, well, Everton had an advantage and an advantage the year before. I just think the whole thing should be speeded up so everybody knows earlier on what the judgment is and can plan accordingly. Leaving it 18 months after the fact is just I find that shambolic, to be honest with you. Especially since the gap between when did we get said we'll be referred, was that a couple of months ago, was it something like that?
Yeah, I think it was March? Towards the end of March, I think.
Yeah, and it takes 6 months to go to the side. Come on, yeah, that just seems to be over bureaucratic. And I get there's legal stuff to prepare, but it needs to move quicker than that. Especially since both parties are supposed to be talking to one another during all this time. By the way, it's just the whole time scale is ludicrous. And as I say, it doesn't do anybody any favours, Chris, and it doesn't look well on the Premier League, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Referring to on-the-field matters for a moment there, Joe, there's reports over the weekend that Everton were braced for a potential move from Manchester United, Jordan Pickford. I mean, David De Gea, as we know, is entering the last couple of weeks of his current contract. There's talk of much reduced terms for him. There is supposedly an option for an extra year, so that sort of muddies the waters there. But realistically, there are two players at Everton who could raise substantial funds, and it's Jordan Pickford and Onana. I mean, it's a fast-moving situation. There's reports today that, talking of Onana, that the inter-goalkeeper Onana, Manchester United might have moved to the front of the queue for him. So it is a fluid situation. But it's a massive call, isn't it, for Everton? If somebody just come in for Jordan Pickford, given that we're understanding that the funds are tight at the club and the squad rebuilding may depend on the sale of an asset.
Yeah, so it's a huge call, a big call. I mean, as it stands, no offer's been made. No one's formally contacted Pickford's representatives or anything like that. So I think at the minute, it's still a lot of noise, essentially, to use a Sean Dyche phrase. I think it's a lot of, putting two and two together. Man United need a goalkeeper, potentially need a goalkeeper. Well, Man United and Tottenham are both succession planning for goalkeepers, aren't they? Even if De Gea stays for a little bit longer, it looks like they've both got long-term decisions to make on that front. And obviously, there are only so many goalkeepers out there that would fit their requirements. So people at the top of their game, but also are gettable. And I should think that they would think that Jordan Pickford is within reach given Everton's financial situation, and also the fact that Everton can't even. I know Tottenham can't do this, but in terms of Everton can't even get close to offering Jordan Pickford European football or anything like that. So. It's going to be interesting. It sounds like David Raya at Brentford's got a few admirers, and it sounds like Onana at Inter's got a few as well. Pickford's there as well. Obviously, Manchester United, a lot makes sense for Pickford. Obviously, it allows him to stay in the area that he's living already and gives him an opportunity of European football and to challenge for some silverware. But Pickford's happy at Everton. I think it'll be a case of whatever happens, he'll let everything happen above him and go with whatever is decided above him, because he's settled at Everton and written it a few times. Like he likes the place and he feels at home there. Obviously, he's with his long-term goalkeeping coach Alan Kelly. You've known each other since Preston days and that as well. So I don't think he'll be pushing for a move if one was to come, but. It's definitely it's going to be really. I think the next 10 days or so, in particular, are going to be really, really interesting, because obviously we know from the sale of Richarlison last year, just how big these next 10 days or the 30th of June cutoff point is for in terms of the financial year that the clubs operate towards, and getting another signing onto the books to help make the accounts look better. Now, you'd like to think that things are moving in the right direction on that front, and obviously Everton have already banked the 45, the money for Anthony Gordon. They've already banked the money for Moise Kean, which should now be with them after with Juventus being obliged to make that deal permanent. But if Everton need to sell for financial reasons, then it may we'll get an answer to that in the next 10 days, and it might end up that Everton end up losing out on a little bit more money because they're not in a position where they can hold on for as long as possible. But it's a difficult one with Jordan Pickford. I think this ended up being the main discussion point of our discussion on the retain list, and the situation with Asmir Begovic. To me, it's a much more straightforward situation if Everton has still got Asmir Begovic, because whilst all right, maybe you don't want him. Ideally, he might not be your number one goalkeeper into a Premier League season. He's still as good a number two as you can get in a safe pair of hands, who's kept 2 clean sheets in his last 3 Premier League outings, and those 2 clean sheets come in very big games. The first win of the season last season against West Ham, the massive win against Newcastle towards the tail end of the season before that. If Everton have got Asmir Begovic there, they've got a little bit more room to play with. They don't have him there. They may well be looking for a number. There's certainly a decision to be made on whether they need to sign a number 2 or whether they can promote internally. It becomes a lot more complicated if you then add on trying to find a number 1. And good goalkeepers can move on for relatively small sums of money, but it would be difficult to see how Everton could find a replacement that does as good a job for Everton as Jordan Pickford's done the last 2 years, without significantly reaching into the funds that they would hope to acquire. And this is something I wrote about last week in a kind of a transfer state of play scenario. The problem that Everton have got is that the two most saleable assets are Jordan Pickford and Amadou Onana, but with Begovic having gone and potentially with Tom Davies maybe going, they leave themselves in a situation where if they were to cash in on either of those players, they then create a hole in a scenario that needs filling. Sean Dyche wants to play 3 centre midfielders and he sells Onana and Tom Davies doesn't sign. Well, he's only really left with Guy, Decore, and James Garner. He probably needs 5. You probably want 5 centre midfielders. Even if Tom Davis stays, if they're selling out, they probably still need to find a squad player. And the problem is, like, if you're getting 40, 50 million pound in for these players, all of a sudden you're having to spend 15 million on trying to fill in the gaps for lesser players to then come in and do jobs, and all of a sudden then that eats into the money that could be spent on the forwards or the fullbacks or the wingers that we know Everton needs. So it's such a complicated situation. One thing I was wondering a little bit with Pickford is obviously Manchester United have got a situation with Dean Henderson, which isn't resolved. I don't think he looked like at one point he was going to end up being United's new number 1. Then, I think De Gea came back, took the number 1 slot. Obviously, we know Henderson went out on loan to Forest last season. I think he's quite vocal in his criticism of the way the club, Man United, had handled the situation. And I'm not quite sure there's a way back there for Dean Henderson. And you just wonder if, he's a good goalkeeper, Dean Henderson. He played well for Forest until he got injured. Like, I wonder if that would maybe, Marnie and Dean Henderson would be about as good a goalkeeper as I think Everton could hope to get to replace Pickford and still have some money left over. I wonder if it got to the point where Man United were genuinely interested in Pickford, whether that could be part of a deal.
Gav, your thoughts on it? I mean, are Everton very fortunate that Jordan Pickford seems to be settled? Because I guess if Pickford was pushing for a move, could be a very different situation. But he is relatively settled. Has that put Everton into a very fortunate position? What's your take on it all?
Fortunate position that actually he wants to stay. So it's. I mean, it's one of these things that of the cheap players, from a footballing perspective, you probably want an Arna to go because Pickford's so vital. What the club would say is, from a financial perspective, it's better to sell Pickford because
29. You mean?
Yeah. Well, also as well, he generate the biggest profit because we get a load of cash in for an Arna. We'd have to give like quite a bit of that to could be bought from for the start. And there's a sell-on. They've got a sell-on clause happening and stuff. So from a finance perspective, it's better for the club to sell Pickford. I think it could be within Jordan's gift, couldn't it? Really, what he wants. 29. He's maybe thinking there's a couple of people behind me at England. If it goes to United, I'll raise my profile a little bit more. It might be better for me England career if it goes to United. Don't know. He doesn't strike me as somebody who will just do it just for the money and so on. It's an interesting one. It just shows I've got a funny feeling this whatever the reasons are for Begovic not staying, you got a funny feeling that this is things said at the time. This is going to bite us in the bum at some point during the summer, isn't it? Not Begovic not staying, and I think if Pickford went, it would just accelerate that process because they're looking for 2 keepers, and I don't think that won't be ideal. So yeah, I don't know, Chris. I mean, I just also know is that Pickford's best to be sold for financial reasons. It's better for us and honest football reasons, probably. But it's within Jordan's gift. I don't know. So maybe there's some interesting conversations going on in the England camp then at the moment, isn't it?
Not quite. I mean, Everton have obviously that in the past. Yeah.
Yeah, I always remember there's a story that in 1990, Ferguson allegedly told Clayton Blackmore to have a word with Neville, about going to Man United, and then Fergie saw Neville's post-side protest during the summer and said, "Oh no, I might give that one a swerve," So things can change, but within Jordan's gift, isn't it? Really, be interesting to see what happens there. But it's the Begovic one that's still grates with me a little bit.
Yeah. Joe, interesting comments from Alex Iwobi, Everton's player of the year. I mean, he's ruled himself out of a move to Saudi Arabia, but he said he still quite like Champions League football. So it's one that the club have to watch because he's getting down to the last 12 months of his contract now.
Yeah, Alex Iwobi's another kind of interesting, scenario that's perhaps slipped under the radar so far in all our discussions, really, because, like you say, he enters the last 12 months of his contract this summer. So, if Everton this summer's probably is the last chance for Everton to make some money off him, really, if somebody was to come in. There's been a contract there. Contract talks been ongoing for quite some time. I think it was back in October when I wrote that Everton had opened discussions on signing a new deal. And it was around that time they were talking to Gordon, Pickford and Iwobi. And, we know how the other two went. Gordon, they never got over the line. And then he ended up leaving. Pickford eventually did commit to a longer term future. Alex Iwobi, there's not really been any update, and it's a bit different with some of the others, because remember when asking Sean Dyche around this in the final weeks of the season, he was always quite clear in the sense that the players who are out of contract, it's not as if with 6 weeks ago in the season he was having conversations with them about their futures. He was very much focusing on the football and staying up. But one of the caveats he'd always make is he'd always say that he wasn't when he was answering that question, he wasn't talking about the discussions that had already started before he arrived. Obviously, by that point, eventually referring to only really Alex Iwobi. So, they haven't been able to strike a deal. And, it's an interesting one. I mean, if you're Alex Iwobi, I'm not sure that you would commit to a long-term future with Everton this summer, because having 2 relegation battles and the way in which this summer has started, you couldn't rule out a difficult season next season as well. So, if he was to commit for a long-term future, obviously he has his own financial security and stability, and he knows he's got a wage coming in for however long that contract is. But he might want to gamble and just run it out. And he tries hard, he works hard. He's a nice player, he's a popular character, and he's played really well for Everton at big moments over the last 2 years. So, really, it's going to be an interesting one. With Iwobi in this summer, I don't really know who would. I don't know who would come in for him. And I feel like as impressive as he's been in bursts, and I'm mainly thinking at the beginning of the season when he was kind of moved into the centre midfield, because they haven't had a bit of a crisis in the centre midfield. And by the time we got to World Cup break, I think Everton scored 11 goals in 15 games, which is obviously a paltry number, and he'd either scored or set up more than half of them. So if he'd have been playing with a proper striker, we saw him link up with DCL for Calvert-Lewin's goal against Crystal Palace. If he'd have had a proper lineup in front of him, then it may well be that those numbers would have been much higher. But yeah, it's another fascinating one. There's so many moving pieces. There's so many kind of open-ended questions at Everton at the minute, and it's just so important, really, again, that there's a clear, defined strategy that's taking hold at Finch Farm. And to be fair, there might be one at Finch Farm. We know that there's a lot of issues going on at the Liver building and the board at the minute. They may have seeped into Finch Farm. They may not. We don't quite know, but Everton can't afford another transfer window like January, where they just ended up being a whole bunch of mixed signals and just a chaos that led to Everton getting weaker than stronger. Someone needs to be made. They can't just then someone needs to have already fought through the Alex Iwobi situation and know what the club's position is. They can't just wake up tomorrow morning and turn out someone's put 15 million down for him and then go, oh yeah, we'll take it, and not have a plan B, etc. So, I don't know, but I suspect that obviously the club will have a good idea where Alex's position stands, because they've been talking about a contract with him for 8 months. So, they'll probably know which way that one's going and whether they're either close to a deal or not. So that'll influence whether or not they would be willing to accept any money. But do you think would a Champions League club come in for Alex Iwobi at the minute? I'm not entirely sure. I like him a lot, but I don't know. I feel like he probably has to have a very, very good season with Everton next season to then, put himself in that conversation.
Yeah. Well, Gav, he threatens to upset his gardener, doesn't he? His Evertonian gardener, Alex Iwobi, who was telling us all about ahead of the Bournemouth game, all these people around him in the Iwobi inner circle who were all Blues, even though he lived in Manchester. I mean, he's had a strange old Everton career, hasn't he? Ups and downs, different positions, and not quite sure how to get the best out of him. I suppose this sums it up. We don't know. On the one hand, is he going to run down his contract? Is he offering a new deal? Is he off to a Champions League club? We really don't know.
Yeah, think the two issues here is that just general threat of relegation over the last 2 years has probably hampered contract discussions. And again, just speculating, I would imagine one of the issues is Iwobi's rumoured to be one of the best earners at the club, isn't he? One of the highest. And I think when the club comes to look at his contract, I think they would be a little bit unwise to offer the same previous terms, because the financial position of the club's changed dramatically since 2019. So you think that's probably hampered things as well, about how much Iwobi wants, how much he's worth compared to what he's getting at the moment. Yeah, so I think that's probably the stumbling block. And like a lot of players, you can't let players go because other clubs won't pay the same fee wage to what they've got at the moment. And that's causing us all sorts of issues. That means that we either go out on loan or they just run down the contract and then go. And Mina's another example of that, isn't it? Really, and we've got to. I mean, what's out? If you just it's worth a discussion here. If Iwobi went now, how much do you think he'd go for?
A lot less than what they paid for him, obviously, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Well, with 1 year left on his contract, as Joe said, yeah, he's had a decent couple of seasons. A few ups and downs, but it's for 18 months. I'd say he's had. If you sold him now, look to sell him, what do you think his market value would be?
I think you'd probably you'd do well to get sort of 8 figures for him, wouldn't you? I don't know.
Yeah. I feel like a year on, and probably with Everton perhaps needing to sell, arguably, or certainly in a position where they're willing to listen to offers for players, you'd think, probably 12 to 15 million, maybe, I reckon.
Yeah, possibly. I think that's the high end. It's just then his wages on top of that, isn't it? I mean, so I just it's just complicated, as I say, by the fact that the contract negotiations probably hampered by the relegation issue, as Dice alluded to, and the fact that he's on a rumoured allegedly to be on a 6-figure weekly wage. So yeah, I don't know where we go with this. He doesn't say. I mean, I don't think I've heard anything about him wanting to move. So it's just being set to what pan out. But what will happen next year if he goes on a free? Goes in the same problem with Yerry Mina and some of midfielders going is we've then got to spend quite a bit of money just to get a replacement, haven't we? Cash that we haven't got. So in some respects, he's probably worth more to us at the moment if we keep him, isn't it? Really, and offer him a deal, maybe even to the wages that he's got, because the alternative is he goes next season on a free. And at least protect his value in the transfer market. So he's, I suppose, in some respects, in quite a strong negotiating position, really. And from that angle, but there's just you can't have a conversation about Everton at the moment about anything without saying the phrase "there's so many movable parts here." It's just a stock in trade quote, isn't it? Really, and Iwobi's definitely one of them. It's just several dimensions to it. And I like in Pickford, I suppose it's going to be within his gift what he wants to do. If he goes on a free next year, that won't. I don't think that will be good.
I think it's a good place to end it with that. As Gav said, could be so many movable parts. Who knows, in an hour or two, we could all change again. But for now, I've been Chris Beesley, been joined by Joe Thomas, by Gavin Buckland. This has been the Royal Blue Podcast.